All right, today we're going to be talking about the devouring mother archetype. The reason for this video idea was I see it often in counseling, I see it often in parents I work with. So, something I wanted to talk about for some parenting, some counseling type of wisdom here. The devouring mother archetype, well, it's an archetype. Carl Jung created these archetypes that are from the collective unconscious. So, what that means is that they are some type of, let's say, attitude towards something which govern behavior, is a good way to think about it. The devouring mother is essentially a mother who strips away the right for their child to undergo strife, which means they coddle their child, they are overprotective, and from a place of love, they're overprotective. This is opposed to the good mother. The good mother is what we know from, like Mary, for instance, in the Bible, is a mother who is loving and giving and nurturing, but less so protective, like the devouring mother. The devouring mother is concerned with safety, so that makes her child essentially pampered and coddled too. A pampered child of the terrible mother eventually becomes a codependent partner. The reason for this is because a codependent partner says, I love this person because I need them, which is the definition of immature love according to Eric Fromm, is I love you because I need something from you. Well, the pampered child, the child who was a victim of the terrible mother, of the devouring mother, which is synonymous for our video here today, they are in a perpetual state of needing something because they were infantilized their entire life. And if you are infantilized, you need a caretaker. So this is where we get the codependent partners, we get the codependent clients, is often from a devouring mother. And to give a little bit more background on Eric Newman's perspective, who is the one who created the terrible mother, made it more mainstream, less obscure from what Carl Jung had originally portrayed it as. Eric Newman saw the Great Mother as potentially the dragon that the hero might conquer, which is, in myth and stories, which is the ability to overcome unconscious fears and regressive instincts, to be able to individuate from the collective unconscious, which is to grow past these archetypes which may govern your life, and essentially grow to be the hero, which is someone who's courageous, someone who's willing to go through strife to meet their goals and to, let's say, find meaning in life, which is ultimately complex. As I was doing research for this video, I came across an interesting article which maps different mythological creatures to the devouring mother, like gorgons, like Medusa, like serpents. The Egyptian mother goddess is a good example as well. I thought that was pretty fascinating. From what the article was mentioning, is these archetypal figures were associated with intense degrees of anxiety of the anima, which is a female archetype in the male brain, which leads the male to, like, let's say, like the unconscious, to the self, to the soul. It's you could consider it the soul even. And that's why it was interesting to see, like, these mythological creatures of the Divine Mother were, in essence, a contradiction of the soul. I think that's something we'll dive into more in this video, but it's something I found interesting in this article. But to give you another example of the Devouring Mother in modern media, a really good example is Mother Gothel from Tangled, so with Rapunzel. And with myth, it's interesting. So things are, personified or symbolized in a very obscure and extreme way to represent some psyche processes. Is essentially the belief in the psychodynamic perspective of psychology. So with Mother Gothel, she essentially holds Rapunzel in a state of, for 18 years, in a state of complete isolation from the world, which is the actual perpetual state of a real victim of the terrible mother is this state of isolation. It's this state of shielding. So essentially, the castle with its height is a symbol for this type of shielding, this type of protection from the world, the harsh realities of the world. If you recall from the movie, she always references the world is dangerous. The world wants to use you. But we know that Mother Gothel is the villain. In reality, we learn that she wants to use her. So if you want to think about one truth from this, it could be that Mother Gothel is projecting her own desire to use and abuse her child, to pamper and protect and shield her child, projecting those feelings onto others. And it's like, well, that must mean that others want to hurt this child or also use this child. And it can go into that in terms of projection. But it's fascinating that Mother Gothel isolates her child, protects her child ultimately for her own benefit, which is precisely what the devouring mother does. She says, I can't handle that you might go off into the world and get hurt. I can't handle that as the parent, which ultimately leads to the child becoming isolated. The child inherits these beliefs that the world is dangerous and that they do need to find a caretaker. And so Mother Gothel is a fantastic archetypal example of someone who is selfishly loving their child for their own gain. And of course, okay, it's a Disney villain, so, it seems over the top and it seems in some ways silly. But in reality, this reveals profound truths about what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a caretaker in general, right? It's like, it's not just about, it's not that nobody can relate to this villain because she's a very famous villain, a very famous story. There has to be some type of resonance within our collective unconscious that we resonate with this character with. And of course, that is our own desire to protect that which we love in an extremely selfish and narcissistic way sometimes. Mostly selfish and narcissistic, but that can be a part of the process here. We overprotect it because we're afraid that it could get hurt, right? And that's why we have adages. Okay, if you love something, set it free, right? It's the opposite of this mindset where if you love something, hold it as tightly as you can and don't let it move, or else it could get hurt and you could lose it, that object of love. And now this leads me into the cardinal sin of the devouring mother. Viktor Frankl, prominent existential psychotherapist, he really revolutionized what it means to be existential. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning, Yes to Hope. He wrote Doctrine of the Soul, a variety of books that you guys might have been invested in before. What he says is, what man needs is not a tensionless state, rather the striving towards some goal worthy of him. Right? I give that quote to my clients a lot. I said, you're in a position of tension right now, but this is precisely where you want to be. Right? A tensionless state would be profoundly diminishing for what your soul can and will bargain with to find meaning in life. This is what the cardinal sin of the devouring mother. She steals away the child's right towards strife, as I'm saying, the child's right towards certain meanings. One thing we learn as counselors is, say a client's grieving, right? They might say, I wish someone could just take away all my grief. But what we know is grief is proportionate to the depth of love. So if I took away all your grief, I couldn't do so unless I take away your depth of love, right? To limit your experience in life. The lows in life give headway to the highs of life, right? They also give it meaning. They also give it credibility. They give it. They're also the precedent and the antecedent, right? So you can't take away a client's suffering. You want to be able to use it, transform it into some type of meaning, but you don't take it away. The devouring mother takes away the child's right to suffer, where meaning is ultimately found, right? Which gets me into this Dostoevsky quote. And it has a similar meaning, and you'll see what I mean by that. But it's a longer quote, so I'm going to read it to you instead of trying to memorize all of it. All right. Okay. And this is from Notes from the Underground. Dostoevsky said, "Shower upon him every earthly blessing. Drown him in bliss, so that nothing but bubbles would dance on the surface of his bliss, as on a sea. And even then every man, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer libel, would play you some loathsome trick. He would even risk his cakes and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive rationality his fatal, fantastic element, simply in order to prove to himself that men still are men and not piano keys." Okay, essentially, what you could understand this quote as is, men aren't happy being purely free, right? Something Jordan Peterson talks about a lot is, okay, you have pure freedom, but where's your responsibility? Responsibility is also what gives life meaning, is responsibility. We feel most fulfilled when we're useful and responsible for something, right? This is also a cardinal sin of not having children in general, is the belief that liberty is more important than responsibility for fulfillment, which it never is. And there's not a single mythological story that I can think of right now, which is probably just an appeal to ignorance. But it's still it's much more common for responsibility being useful in some type of adventure being the meaning of life. Okay, so Dostoevsky is saying that without some type of strife, without some type of suffering, man will find some type of issue, right? Things could be perfect, but man will find some type of issue. Let's apply it to our situation here. The devouring mother leaves no room for growth, no room for obstacles for their child. Well, the child's going to find some type of issue. What is that issue? The issue is going to be that they had no type of growth. They had no type of obstacles, right? Things are infinitely harder for this child than it would be for a child who had gone through hard things, who had been told hard truths. If you remember my last video, people thought it was kind of funny because it was like, I'm going to tell people hard truths and let them do what they will with that truth, right? But part of that desire was, I'm not going to be a devouring mother. I'm not going to strip away your right to strife, your right to suffer, which gives credence to your right for meaning, to right to ascend that suffering, right? Essentially, we can all be brutally honest and have this this very, let's say, like, very balanced freedom mixed with responsibility and utility. So some type of levity amongst responsibility. We can have that, but we can't have pure liberty. We'll have no meaning. We'll have no meaning in life. And then tie that back to what Viktor Frankl said. There has to be some goal worthy of him that he strives for, right? If there's no tension, there's no meaning. So that's kind of the tie-in between those two ideas, which is why I put them here together. Now we step into the next facet, the next dimension, I think the devouring mother strips from their child, which is the belief that life has meaning, which we've touched on. But, okay, so ultimately, they end up believing in nihilism. Nihilism is defined as the belief that there is no purpose in life. Right, okay. So that starts with there's no tension in life, and thus there's no suffering, and therefore there's no meaning. Because as we know from great mythological stories, from great religious texts, suffering is what gives life meaning, right? For example, as Carl Jung said, Jesus' descent into hell for 3 days was his precondition to ascend into heaven. Okay, well, what does that mean mythopoetically, which means to find myths and find the meaning of them symbolically. What does that mean? It's like, okay, you have to suffer be able to ascend, transcend your own fate. You need to suffer, right? And I don't propose suffering needlessly or meaninglessly. Some suffering is simply just suffering, right? I mean, that's also hard to bargain with, because Viktor Frankl says there's always an objective meaning in every situation. It's up to us to find it. And sometimes it's very obscure, very hard to find. So I guess I proposed both of those sides of that argument there for you, and I kind of will allow you to draw your own conclusion. And another way that this devouring mother archetype, this spirit of the time, can lead to the lack of meaning in life is through identity. We form most of our connections, relationships, our personality, where we form our meanings from identity. Okay, well, let's look at the traits, right? We all know that the first level of personality is trait level, right? That's like the Myers-Briggs and the 16 personalities, and Carl Jung's had theories on this too. He's revolutionary in that way. But the deepest level of personality, the third level, is narrative, right? We learn through stories the best. We inherit our beliefs about ourselves most innately through our internal story we tell about ourselves, right? So just for the learning sake of this, is like someone who's depressed, we often find like contamination in their narrative, right? So it's like, yeah, I was a good kid, but then, I was 14 and everyone kind of hated me and I was kind of ugly. And okay, you see there's contamination in their story. And then even when they're 30, they're like, well, I know those things aren't true, but they never really worked through that internal narrative to rework it. So they kind of always inherited that belief. Okay, that's just for some slight education on the narrative aspect here. Okay, so the narrative with someone with a devouring mother, what do they narratively tell themselves? Well, okay, let's say my parents keep over coddling me, being overprotective, therefore the world must be dangerous. Or second, I must not be strong enough to handle it. Okay, if your identity is fragmented as such, you lose your initial wholeness, individuation, potential, which is like the Ouroboros. So it circles into itself, right? You start as whole. Well, you've already lost that by being born in the first place, but you lose it more. You descend. This is a huge obstacle to overcome, the devouring mother, which is why Eric Newman said it's a dragon to slay. But you become extremely unwhole, right? Your chance at individuation, which is wholeness, becomes extremely diminished. And let's say you believe that you can't handle hard things. This is one of the narrative beliefs that you've told yourself from witnessing your parents, which is what kids do. Kids will see what their parents do, make assumptions about themselves rather than about their parents. The reason this happens is because children will do anything to keep the connection alive, right? This is attachment theory. So let's say a mom is being mean to the child will inherit that belief that they suck, instead of saying that the mother was overbearing or some. That's just one example. Okay, so let's say God is a calling. Jordan Peterson defines God as like a calling, a spirited guide to adventure. Your calling. So if it elicits a positive emotion, that means you're in line with your calling, and then if it's a negative emotion, that means you're aligned with your conscious. This isn't necessarily my belief about what God definitionally is, but this is a fantastic thing to ponder over. It's still very wise in this way. So God is a calling. Well, if you have this narrative belief that you can't go through hard things, how can you ever, on God's green earth, achieve your calling? You can't. Because as soon as you reach the first obstacle on your, let's say, adventure to find meaning in life, well, you're going to crumble. You're going to burn to ashes, right? This one singular obstacle will be way too much. So in order to find meaning in life, to transcend death in some type of spiritual, symbolic, mythological, whichever way, transcendental way, you have to be able to go through hard things, because to get to those heights, we know you have to suffer. Again, Jesus walked through hell before he went to heaven, right? Every treasure chest is guarded by a dragon, right? Every hero goes through strife, right? Superman isn't Superman without General Zod and Lex Luthor challenging him to suffer first to get stronger. So essentially, you need to be able to go through hard things in order to be able to find meaning in life. But if you inherit the belief throughout your entire upbringing that you cannot go through hard things, that the world is dangerous and that you can't go through hard things. So essentially you're concerned with safety over calling, and those are contradictory. You can't be concerned with both. So you're concerned with one or the other. Then you can't get to your calling. So of course you're going to think life has no meaning because you never achieved the meaning in life. Because you can't. Because you're limited by your own inability and unwillingness to confront difficult tasks and hard things that you could go through that will make you stronger, right? I mean, look at the Herculean trials, right? He had to fight a lion. Samson had to fight a lion. It's my poster right there. Samson had to fight a lion, and he was able to do so through his faith. His faith that going through hard things, the courage to be, as Paul Tillich says, the courage to be in the face of unbeing, right? Like, it's all about being able to suffer upwards, in the upward direction, right? So you don't just suffer needlessly, as I mentioned earlier. Nihilism is the belief that suffering doesn't have meaning. So if you can turn that suffering, and you will suffer, but if you can turn that suffering into some type of direction towards your calling, then yeah, you will be able to achieve your meaning. But if you believe you can't suffer, if you can't suffer at all, well then, yeah, you're nihilistic. But if you believe suffering has no meaning, well then you're especially nihilistic. So it's a lose-lose with the devouring mother archetype in that scenario with identity. And the final dimension I want to talk about with nihilism is actually the hedonistic dimension, which I hesitate to go into. I think it could be its own video with how hedonism and nihilism are bidirectional. It'd be actually cool to do a TED Talk on that topic in particular, because I think it's very niche, but it's also seems profound, and it's something I wrestle with a lot. But yeah, so anyway, so with hedonism, right? Typically, I don't want to say 100%, but the devouring mother is also, okay, well, she's coddling, right? So she tends to be pampering. Now, I don't want to say this is a 100% correlation. But, okay, let's say you're a pampered child, which tends to be from a devouring mother, right? It's like, you can have whatever you want, that kind of spoiling behavior. Okay, well, the child is more hedonistic. They fall in love with the material goods of the world. They don't learn how to fall in love with the spiritual goods of the world, the natural beauty of the world. So when the material goods inevitably fail because they're false idols, they will fail. They reliably do so. Then you will have no meaning to fall back on. You'll have no spiritual beauty, no transcendence, and likely even possibly no relational world to fall back into, because you fall in love with. Oh man, I mean, I hate to be a reductionist here, but you fall in love with, let's say, TikTok, for example. Those who fail to find meaning outside of just their simple bodily pleasures, they fail to transcend reliably, as I had mentioned. But there's so many philosophers who believe in such a thought. So many people have talked about that, Seneca is a good one to talk about, for example, quickly, because he was so ascetic. He believed in the opposite. It's like you have to be the opposite of hedonistic. You have to deny all of your pleasures so that you are ready to go through hard things when they, come up. So it's two perspectives. It's hedonism, and in my opinion, what Seneca was made so profound is the opposite is asceticism. Only one leads to some type of spiritual growth and spiritual resilience is a good way to put it, whereas the other leads to kind of this love for the earthly things that we know is a sin, is analogous to sin. I'm the perfect example of this mythologically. I guess not mythologically, but I guess you could say through let's say a very famous story in German culture, which has been elevated to myth in some ways, is Faust, the Faustian bargain. He bargains his eternal soul for that which is temporary, rather than sacrificing that which is temporary, which would be like the momentary pleasures in life, right, which is the asceticism part, for that which is eternal. He sacrifices the wrong way, and that leads to, he gets all he wants on earth, but then he sacrifices his soul to hell, right? He estranges himself from God, and again, we can define God however we decide to. That could be its own video. We could look at different perspectives if that would be interesting. But now, a good mythological story to summarize everything I talked about is actually Jonah and the whale. I won't go into too much depth because Jordan Peterson does so in his book, We Who Wrestle with God, and that's kind of what I'm referencing here. He looks at God as a spirited call to adventure, right? Like it's your calling. Whereas Jonah attempts to run away from that calling. What happens is, well, he goes to hell. He gets eaten by a whale for 3 days. He sits in the belly of a whale for 3 days. The same amount of days that Jesus went to hell, right? Half of 6, let's say, for example. Clearly, this is some type of allegory for hell on earth, let's say, right? The belly of the whale, it's pure estrangement from God, right? It's as deep as you can go away from God on earth. But why did that happen? Well, he avoids his calling for adventure, right? And to me, that's exactly what happens when you have a pampered child who cannot really say no to their hedonistic desires. If you can't say no to hedonism, you can't really pursue things towards your calling, because you can't go through suffering, you can't go through hard things. You're quick to expect something easy. You're quick to expect something handed to you as well. So again, it's hard to say yes to your calling when you're hedonistic, right? You have to be ascetic because you lose that spiritual resilience. So what happens when a pampered child never hears an external no, a no from their parents, for example? Well, if they don't hear an external no, do you expect them to be like when they're older? I ought to tell myself internally no, often, right? That's what's going to bring forth the most moral worth and moral resilience. No, that's not really a fair thing to expect. So it starts with parenting. It starts with parenting being able to say no to their child so that they can not be afraid when God calls on them to pursue their meaning in life. And again, I'm using God symbolically. Like, if you want to replace the word God with something else that fits your life, sure, do it. But like the message is the same. Is you have to follow. Like, okay, let's look at the alchemist, for example. The alchemist is a great story. Well, he doesn't follow God in a literal sense, but I mean, he's following his calling. He's following his meaning in life. It's just as profound, just as beautiful. So that's what we're pursuing, is that bravery to go do hard things, to go suffer, to avoid the trap that is nihilism and hedonism, and to really, to not coddle people, because then they become those things inherently. Now here we're going to get more into the solution, right? And we can find that in myth as well. Let's look at Abraham and Isaac, for example. A lot of atheists might look at this story and be like, well, what kind of God would you follow who asked you to sacrifice your son on an altar? And it's like, okay, well, you're missing the point. The point, and of course, symbolically speaking, the point is that God didn't actually make Abraham kill his son, but he wanted to ensure that Abraham was the type of person who was willing to sacrifice his son. Okay, well, using the words we've been using all video, well, I mean, what do you think that entails? It's like the devouring mother is the person who was the complete opposite. The complete opposite is you'll never sacrifice your child for anything. You will sacrifice the world if it means protecting your child. Well, a good mother, which is what you could say Abraham was possessed by archetypally in this story, the good mother says, this is how brutal and harsh the world is. I'm going to subject you to it because I want you to be able to handle it with your head high without becoming suicidal and depressed and grief-stricken, while pursuing your transcendence and your own meaning through these things that are hard and challenging. So I think the overarching message that God doesn't have Abraham kill Isaac is he wanted to ensure that Abraham could be the type of parent who would sacrifice their child to the world, right? And in this definition, we'd be looking at God as like the Eastern religion, Eastern philosophies, how they see God, which is like oneness with the universe, right? It's more about this interconnectedness. Well, if that's the case, if that's how we want to define God in this scenario, what you're saying is you want your child to be able to be socially cohesive with the universe, right? To understand the universe works in certain ways. You ought to become aligned with it, because the more you are unaligned with it, the more depressed, the more isolated you're going to be. Carl Jung made this point phenomenally, because what he said is the more we unalign ourselves with our own nature, the more depressed we become, the more neurotic we become, is the words that the old school psychologists would use, is neurotic, for disorders. But like, the more unaligned you are with your own nature, the more you become that, right? And that could be, let's say, unaligning yourself with religious practices or some type of spiritual practice. That could be a variety of things, but this is just one scenario where, if you teach your child to do whatever they want whenever they want, so they become very socially incohesive, they're not aligning with how social cohesion works. They're not aligning with reciprocity and altruism, things that would lead to cohesion for in their life, even not just the society's life, but their life as well. So they will become ostracized and isolated. And so you see a lot of children who are children of devouring mothers, who are children of people who won't sacrifice their kid to God, who are ostracized. It's them versus the world at all times. It's like, everyone hates me, but it's all their fault, right? It's like, that's not plausible. That's not plausible. You have to act in accordance with our social values, our social cohesion values, like altruism and reciprocity. And that's the fault of the devouring mother, the mother who isn't like Abraham who's willing to sacrifice his son to God, right? A parent who could do those things, who has a potential to let their kids set out in the world at their own great risk. And another great story is just the evolution of the Bible just continued on that road, is God sacrificed his own son. He sacrificed Jesus to the world. That's a fantastic example. And what happens when God sacrificed Jesus to the world? Well, Jesus, he learned, he studied, he became a rabbi, he became the most moral person that we could aspire towards. He transcended death because he went to hell and then to heaven. He transcended death. And you're starting to see this pattern of, okay, pretend you don't believe in religion in the strict sense that God is a metaphysical being. At least look at it symbolically. At least take some lessons away. Because psychologically, we are saying the same things as myth has been saying forever, right? We've replaced the language, but the ideas are the exact same. We've just co-opted it in a different way that's less spiritually aligned, so even less powerful. And along with that, of course, Abraham was probably extremely anxious, extremely worried for his own child, right? But what the good mother does is they put aside their own anxiety for their child's well-being, right? Which is hard, because they know their child is better off for taking those risks, right? So it's like, you have to allow your child to take risks at times, because with risk, they will build the self-confidence, they'll build the wisdom, they'll build the self-efficacious belief that they can follow their own calling in life and create meaning, right, out of nihilism, for example, out of their abyss. They can cultivate meaning because they have some self-efficacy in their system. So it's like, yeah, in the short term, allowing your child to take those risks that, Abraham was doing in this story, which is like, anxiety inducing. Well, you're sacrificing your own comfort in the short term for your child's well-being and growth in the long term. And that seems like a extremely good trade-off to have. It's like, and if you look at it less mythopoetically, if you look at it more psychosocially, maybe your child will dislike you in the moment, because you give them more no's, right? You don't coddle them, you don't pamper them, but you do let them explore the world and take risks. Maybe they'll like you less in the moment, but in the long term, they'll be stronger for it. I want to make this clear as well. Both of these archetypal energies are bred from love. I don't want to give the impression that devouring mother is some type of ill intent. But what we do know is that protection feeds into weakness. We know that safety, this over-reliance on safety, and especially in modern society, and this is likely because of negative affective bias, the news and how media and clout works in society. It's like, we know from psychological literature and from stories that an obsession with safety is analogous to mental illness, right? So that would be my clinical advice is, protection and safety are always going to be secondary and tertiary to this, how do you want to put it? To following your meaning is a way to, is a fine enough way to put it. Is it's not as high up as learning the wisdom of the world and becoming aligned with it is another solid enough way to put it. Now I want to get into more of the opinion parts of this video. There's two opinions I'm going to expound upon. First, let's talk about social critique. My social critique as an example of the devouring mother archetype and why it's so impactful and negative for the current zeitgeist, right? Or why it's its own zeitgeist, is the body positivity movement. The body positivity movement, in essence, says it sacrifices people's potential for growth for their own momentarily and temporary mental well-being. It's analogous to what the devouring mother archetype does. It's our collective unconscious being possessed by this archetype to shelter people's opinions and feelings. Even though, again, if you remember what I recall this thought about this video, is like, even though they're out of social cohesion, right? People who look a certain way, they may feel negatively about their body, right? And that's unfortunate. But those negative feelings aren't just, noise. They also serve some type of purpose. And if we take those negative feelings seriously, we could say, like, well, you feel this way because you intuitively know that less people will be attracted to you if you look a certain way than if you look another certain way. That's simple evolutionary psychology. People are attracted to certain indicators, like indicators of health, for example, are reliably correlated with what we consider to be beautiful in the first place. So like that negative feeling of like, okay, I could do this better. Well, yeah, you probably could, and that's a great goal to have. What's wrong with that goal? Whereas body positivity might look at that and say, like, well, okay, this person's beautiful as they are, and they should learn to be self-accepting of how they are. Well, it's like, okay, well, now you're taking away their right to strife again, their right to align socially, and it becomes a delusional venture of, let's all validate each other to the point where, nothing means anything. There's no objective measures by which we're measuring, no external measures by which we're measuring. Everything becomes an internal obscurity, right? And the unfortunate part, the part where it's like, okay, you can see it's for love, right? They don't want people to feel bad about themselves. But also you have to look at the other side and say, the other side who's encouraging others to be healthy, that's also for love. It's also like, hey man, you're out of sync with what society typically views as this beauty standard. So what you're doing is you're isolating and ostracizing yourself, and the venture that you're taking, the battle that you're going to die on, the hill that you're dying on, is I'm over here. Let's see, I'm over here, and I'm going to change everybody else's perspective to think I'm beautiful with how I am right now because I think I am beautiful. Okay, well that's a extremely hard battle to have. That's never going to work. Versus saying, okay, I'm right here right now. That's okay. I've gone through a lot of hard things. I've been hedonistic before. That's okay. Admit your faults. But I can do better. So everyone else views beauty over here. Well, I can start working towards align with that. But guess what? You also went through something much harder than other people had to go through. You've gone through a very strict diet. You've gone through very hard exercise routines. You've built that type of spiritual discipline, which makes you a stronger and healthier person because of it. And you align with the traditional, more traditional beauty standards. I mean, wow, now you are a fantastic dating prospect. Fantastic. So it's kind of like both come from love, but the position that we, on the people who do the more challenging aspects, like I am with therapy, like a little bit more challenging, the position we have is like, well, I can't encourage you to isolate yourself from what society sees as, reasonable and what they think would be a good thing, right? It's kind of like, I mean, if we just make it analogous to something else, it's like, pretend you have a contingent of people who are very rude, right? And they're like, yeah, well, I'm rude. I want to encourage, like, the same thing. So, like, I'm rude. I want to encourage everyone else to be accepting of me and still love me despite me being rude. Well, I mean, now we sound absurd, don't we? Because everyone who knows anything was like, we need to help this person become more kind so that they can be here. They can come to this side. They can be more kind, which is again the social currencies, reciprocity, altruism. Those are all social currencies that earn people, let's say, social brownie points, right? From a evolutionary perspective, it's like those are our currencies, right? You don't encourage people. You don't invalidate. Like, hey, you're rude. Hey, that's beautiful. That's how you are. That's who you are. Just be yourself. That would be a disservice to them because they're gonna continue to be isolated. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense in terms of that analogy makes sense of why we don't just encourage people to isolate themselves. You know, it's like, okay, you can expect to, you can look how you want to look, and if you're happy with how you look, I mean, that's awesome. Confidence is also attractive. There's other things that are attractive than just purely looks, so don't get me wrong. That's also awesome, and I respect that a lot. But it's like if you expect most people to think you're beautiful, or you get angry at people for not thinking you're beautiful how you are, which is what I see more anecdotally, I guess I'll say. I see that more than just like statistically. So that's why it's opinion based. But you know, I see that more often. It's like, you know, okay, you're mad at somebody else for not thinking you're beautiful how you are, and it's like, well, you have to expect, if you're going to look a certain type of way, not take care of your body in a certain type of way, that it looks less healthy. If it looks less healthy, people think it looks less beautiful. This is very simply evolutionary, and of course it's unfortunate. Like, I'm not saying it's good, but it's also okay. Well, this is a motivation to continue to work on yourself and to continue to grow, but to align with social values, and to align with to be socially cohesive as a person, right? And so I guess I just want to summarize what the two sides is. You know, you can choose to attempt to become more healthy, and therefore by extension more beautiful, align with how society views beauty, or you can attempt to argue and fight with the rest of society who say you must view that I'm beautiful. So you're consistently feeling insecure, consistently lashing out at people for a traditional view of beauty, which is, you know, even in media, you know, is you're consistently lashing out. And the two sides, I mean, one leads to an allegiance with social cohesion, and the other is so far delusional that it would need the devouring mother archetype in spirit to continue to feed its delusion, which is precisely why the movement is purely based on this delusion, right? What's more helpful for somebody is telling them that, you know, hey, you're healthy and beautiful as you are, or saying, hey, listen, man, you could do better. You could do better. That's okay. I still like you and love you as you are. Don't get me wrong. But if you're asking for my honest opinion, I mean, you could do better. And you could be happier by doing better. That's simple calling. This leads me to my last critique. Opinion-based. Is in counseling. I'm always going to come back to that. It's my field, you know. Well, Irvin Yalom said that too often counseling is infantilizing the client. Well, that's the cardinal sin of the devouring mother, is you infantilize the child because you don't believe in their own ability to withstand all of what reality entails, all of what suffering entails. So too often counselors coddle clients, right? And this is often done through the incessant need to validate, right? We learn one of our core principles as counselors is validation. Unconditional positive regard, for example, is another one. And it's like, okay, well, pure validation can sometimes look like pure agreement with how the client views the world and how they are in the world, right? So it becomes a purely coddling, devouring mother act in practice. And often the focus is safety as well. That's like the number one thing that people focus on, is like, my first concern is your safety. Well, again, we know safety breeds mental illness, so it's like you can choose to let the client, test their views against the actual backdrop of a harsh reality, right? Which is like, okay, we're gonna try this, and we're gonna see if this is hard. This is gonna be hard. Not we're gonna see if it's hard. It's gonna be hard, but we're gonna see if this leads to some type of fulfillment. And then versus like, okay, that seems unsafe for you. That's dangerous for you because you've gone through a lot of hard things. Therefore, we're not gonna do that because you're not gonna be able to do that. You're gonna succumb to this type of like, okay, I don't want to say like a particular disorder, but you could succumb to like particular disorders' own shadow side, of like the symptomatology. And it's like, yeah, so our focus is too often on safety instead of confrontation, like a healthy confrontation, right? In essence, again, that means we're, instead of challenging and confronting our client to grow, we often coddle, right? And this is where you get the two perspectives of there's more, but there's two perspectives I'm talking about right now. Or you have a counselor who creates and nurtures codependency in their sessions, right? And this is from like in practice, the more humanistic stance, right? It's more like consistent validation and agreement, and it's like, let's change your situation to match how you view the world. Let's break up with your current partner because they're not really matching this and that. You're right in everything that you do. Your endeavors you're always on the right track, and you should accept who you are fully as you are. And then you get the other side, who's more like me, perhaps more existential, but also perhaps more just like more, challenging in general. Who says like, no, like you could be more, you could do better. That's why you're in my office, right? Jordan Peterson says a great example is like people who are depressed. They don't want to be told, you're doing great. You should accept who you are as you are. You're amazing. They don't want to be told that. They want to be told, hey, this is how you can grow. This is how you can challenge yourself. We're going to look at the deepest parts of you and find out what's troubling you, what's causing you to be in this slump. We're going to look at the heights as well. We're going to be like, where can you find some type of fulfillment, meaning, and spiritual, spiritual transcendence? When this is all going to be really hard work, but you're clearly not perfect as you are, or else why would you be here, right? And being perfect as you are in the first place is already, a fallacy. Who's perfect as they are, right? It's a very, you don't want to get political, but you could say it's a very narcissistic and arrogant pursuit. It really is, right? So then you get the people who, on the other side, the codependent side, where it's like they've been in therapy for 3 to 4 years and things are progressing extremely slowly because the counselor is too afraid to cause any ripples, right? They're afraid to cause any destabilizations in the client's life, which could cause like, that could cause some type of traumatic or depressive phase in their life, They're too afraid to cause a ripple in the relationship. It's like, okay, well, they finally trust me, so if I challenge them now, they're not going to trust me anymore. And so I'm scared to cause a ripple in our therapeutic rapport. You see the slippery slope we're on, where it's like, okay, well, essentially you're saying this client's symptoms are so severe that if I challenge them, if I confront them, if I push them, then they're gonna crumble and they're gonna become weak. So then, in essence, what you do is you keep them weak, right? It's not like, oh, I'm protecting them. It's more like you're protecting, this facade of them, because that's not who they could be. They could be so much more, but you don't push them and challenge them to do that. And again, it's this humanistic, stance and practice that doesn't protrude the psyche in any meaningful way because it's too afraid. And I think okay, this level of delusional aspects, right? Let's take, for example, the last thing I mentioned, the body positivity. it's like, okay, well, you're perfect as you are. Let's learn self-acceptance rather than, let's work at yourself to become more confident and secure in yourself through external work, right? Let's just accept who you are as you are, right? So let's look at that from that perspective. That level of delusion that, people will love how you look, you're perfect as you are, that level of delusion can only exist in the therapy room, because as soon as you test it against a backdrop of a harsh reality, it's going to crumble. People are going to be harsh to that client. People are going to be like, well, let's use the rude analogy instead of body positivity. Let's use rude. Okay, even though you're rude, you're fine as you are. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Other people, you'll find the right group of people who love you for who you are. Then they go out into the realities of life and they try to make friends, and they realize that they can't do it because they're rude and people value kindness. Okay, well, you can start to see what I'm saying. It's like this isn't true kindness. This isn't true counseling. Counseling isn't just coddling your client to accept who they are at all times. It's more so like, is your goal to work on this or not, right? Do you want to be more kind, or do you want to make friends? Okay, well, I'm noticing that, you being rude has often, come in between you and making friends. From my clinical opinion, it seems working on, not getting so quickly angry with other people so that you become rude, giving people more grace and kindness in real life, it seems that might be the pathway forward to helping you make friends, right? You can see the kind of the opposite stances on that. But okay, this is a long ass video. Let me stop ranting about counseling, about all this stuff. I hope all that makes sense. Hopefully you can see in that last example for the counseling example how the devouring mother archetype comes in strong with a lot of counselors. I think people from their own personal experience might notice that as well, with a counselor who just like lets them rant, lets them yap, lets them go off about whatever they want to go off about, but kind of is like not really challenging, kind of just lets them be who they are fully, instead of being like, this is your goal, let's work towards that, and we have to do this, and this, right? Hopefully you can see mythologically some of the ways that the devouring mother might, appear, and kind of some of the mythological lessons we can get from that, like kind of some of the ways that, like, the Egyptian mother goddess who's like overprotective but also kills corpses, like eats corpses and kills people, right? Hopefully you can take away some of the lessons from that as well, where it's like the mythological stance reveals some type of inner psychic truth in the severity of the story, right? Like, it's like, oh, they die, is more so how extreme it feels in our psyche reality, right? So hopefully that all makes sense. Again, drop questions. Let me know what you guys want to talk about next. Let me know where we're going from here. But besides that, sounds like it was a good chat.